In 2022, a young man named Bryce Broal disappeared under strange circumstances, leaving only scattered clues and many unanswered questions. His girlfriend Cordelia's family was puzzled by what had happened, and her father, Michael Ilix, seemed to know more than he let on. What started as a routine missing persons case quickly turned into a chilling tale of lies, revenge, and desperation. What really happened that fateful day? How deep does this mystery run? Stay with us as we uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deceit and suspicion. It was a cold day in a small Minnesota town, with mist blanketing the streets and a damp chill in the air. The usually quiet town of Center felt even more desolate. This was the last place Bryce was seen, leaving home to visit a storage unit with Cordelia's father, Michael. Cordelia had just returned to Minnesota after months of traveling across the country, hoping for a warm welcome and some peace. Instead, she found herself entangled in a series of unsettling events. Shortly after her return, she sensed something was off. Bryce had gone with her father to drop off some belongings at a storage unit just a short walk from their home. The trip should have only taken 30 minutes, but as the hours passed, Bryce didn't come back. Cordelia's unease grew. She tried to distract herself by settling in and taking a shower, but the anxiety wouldn't fade. Later that day, Michael returned alone. He looked shaken and told Cordelia that Bryce had been taken at the storage facility. Michael explained that two dark grey cars had pulled up while they were there. People who seemed like officials got out, but they didn't show any identification or introduce themselves. According to Michael, everything happened so quickly that he couldn't ask questions or figure out what was going on. The strangers restrained Bryce, handcuffed him, and drove off. The cars were plain and unmarked, their headlights cutting through the evening gloom, leaving more questions than answers. The fog clouded Michael's memory, and he couldn't recall any details that might help identify who or what he had seen. His vague words left Cordelia shocked. Desperate for answers, she immediately tried calling Bryce, but his phone was off. She sent him messages, begging him to come back and explain what had happened, but he never replied. As each minute passed, Cordelia's worry grew stronger. By Friday, October 28th, after several days without any news, she went to the Crow Wing County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report. She didn't have much information to give the authorities except for Michael's confusing account. The police wasted no time and launched an investigation. Detectives reviewed all the messages Cordelia had sent Bryce on the night he disappeared. Her panic was clear in the texts, with each message showing her growing fear. Her distress seemed to strike a chord with the investigators. What started as a standard missing persons case quickly became something much darker and more complicated. Officers questioned Michael Ilix, but his statements were inconsistent and left too many unanswered questions. This led to further interviews with him. Meanwhile, investigators visited the storage facility where Bryce was last seen. What they found there only made the situation more mysterious. There were drag marks, like something heavy had been moved, and other pieces of evidence that added a sinister feel to the story. The deeper the police dug into the case, the more unsettling the details became. Bryce Broal's disappearance wasn't just a simple case anymore, it had turned into a troubling enigma filled with fear and uncertainty. Cordelia, who initially trusted her father's story, started to doubt him as everything around her became increasingly strange and incomprehensible. Michael Ilix knew he would be the first person the police would question after Cordelia reported Bryce missing. He tried to mentally prepare himself for the inevitable. That Friday, October 28th, officers tracked Michael down at a family Halloween party in Brainerd. He agreed to return with them to the storage facility and provide a more detailed explanation of what had happened on the day Bryce vanished. Despite this, the story only grew more complex. Each new detail uncovered by the police seemed to raise even more questions. The truth felt increasingly out of reach. Michael recounted the events, trying to include every detail. He explained that he and Bryce had arrived at the storage unit in a white Ford Escape with a trailer to go through some belongings after the long road trip he and Cordelia had recently taken. The task took about 45 minutes, with Bryce sorting through his items to decide what to keep and what to throw away. Around 5:45 p.m., they were getting ready to leave when something unexpected happened. As they started pulling out of the storage unit, two dark grey vehicles blocked their path. Michael described the cars as having flashing lights, but not the kind used by regular patrol cars. Instead, they looked like the lights often seen on unmarked law enforcement vehicles. This immediately made Michael suspicious and question if the people inside were legitimate authorities. According to Michael, both he and Bryce were briefly detained by these unidentified individuals. Michael was taken back to his white Ford Escape, while Bryce was placed in a different vehicle, a dark grey SUV. Michael remembered the COV's interior as plain, except for a small computer mounted on the dashboard. During the encounter, Michael said it seemed highly organized, involving several people. Bryce appeared to understand that this wasn't a random situation. Before they were separated, Bryce thanked Michael for his help but didn't say anything else. Earlier that day, on the drive to the storage unit, the two men had barely spoken. When Michael asked Bryce about the road trip he and Cordelia had taken, Bryce had replied briefly, saying the drive was fine. Both men remained quiet and distant, showing little interest in starting a conversation. As detectives continued their investigation, they uncovered hints of tension within the family. Michael admitted that he felt uneasy around Bryce and was hesitant to spend time with him. This raised questions about why Michael had agreed to help Bryce with the storage unit in the first place, especially without Cordelia being there. Cordelia later explained that she had stayed home that day because she was too exhausted from the long road trip and needed to rest. From Michael's perspective, the trip to the storage unit had been routine until it was interrupted by the strange and unsettling encounter. He speculated that the events might be tied to some kind of trouble Bryce had gotten himself into, especially since Bryce had just returned to town after a lengthy road trip across the United States. Michael wasn't convinced. The mention of Arizona nagged at him. It was too specific to ignore. He pressed Cordelia further, asking why Bryce would be connected to Arizona or why it was relevant to his sudden disappearance. Cordelia hesitated, her eyes darting away as she stammered that it was nothing, just a passing mention. But Michael noticed the tremor in her voice and the way her hands fidgeted nervously. "You're hiding something," Michael said gently but firmly. "Cordelia, if you know anything about this, you have to tell me. This isn't just about Bryce, it could be about your safety too." Cordelia froze for a moment before lowering her gaze. "It's complicated," she muttered. Michael's patience was wearing thin, but he resisted the urge to raise his voice. "I don't care how complicated it is. Tell me what's going on." Finally, Cordelia relented. "There was someone we met on the road in Arizona. Bryce got involved," she began hesitantly. Involved in what? Michael asked, his heart sinking as he prepared for the worst. She shook her head. "I don't know everything, Dad. It was just supposed to be a simple deal. Some guy approached Bryce when we were at a diner, said he needed someone to deliver a package. Bryce thought it would be easy money. We were running low on cash and I didn't think it was a big deal." Michael felt his stomach twist. "What kind of package?" Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know. He wouldn't tell me, and Bryce wouldn't let me see it. He just said it wasn't a big deal, that we'd drop it off and be done with it. But after that, things started happening. People started following us, leaving notes on the car. Bryce said he could handle it, but I was scared. Dad. I wanted to come home, but he insisted we finish the trip." Michael's mind raced. "And when you came home early, was it because of this?" Cordelia nodded slowly. "Something happened. Bryce didn't tell me everything, but he said we had to leave right away. He looked terrified." Michael's instincts told him they were in over their heads. If Bryce had gotten tangled up in something illegal, it could explain his disappearance. But there was still so much Cordelia wasn't saying or didn't know. "Did you ever see the man again?" "The one who gave Bryce the package." Cordelia shook her head. "No, but Bryce got a call from someone after we got home. I don't know who it was, but after that he started acting even stranger." Michael exhaled, his mind piecing together fragments of a puzzle that still didn't make sense. Whoever Bryce had gotten involved with, it wasn't over. "Okay," Michael said, trying to steady his voice. "We're going to figure this out. But you have to tell me everything, Cordelia. No more hiding things, no matter how bad they seem. Cordelia nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. As Michael embraced his daughter, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were both standing at the edge of something far darker than they had imagined. And for Bryce, wherever he was, time might be running out. Michael's mind raced as he processed Cordelia's revelation. Washington? What were you doing there? Cordelia hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. Bryce wanted to meet someone there, she said. He said it was important, something about tying up loose ends. I didn't ask too many questions because, well, he wasn't in the mood to explain. Do you remember where in Washington? Who he was meeting? Michael pressed, his voice tight with concern. I don't know exactly, Cordelia admitted. It was somewhere near Seattle. The guy seemed off. Bryce called him Jack, but I don't think that was his real name. Michael leaned forward, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Did you meet this Jack? What did he want? Cordelia nodded reluctantly. I saw him once. He was older, maybe in his late 40s or 50s. He gave Bryce something, a small package. Bryce told me to wait in the car while they talked. He didn't want me involved. Did Bryce ever tell you what was in the package? Michael asked. No, Cordelia said, her voice trembling. But after that meeting, Bryce started acting even more paranoid. He kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder, and talking about people following us. Michael's heart sank. Whatever Bryce had gotten involved in, it was serious. He realized that his daughter might be in more danger than she realized. Did Bryce ever say why he was so worried? Or what these people wanted? Cordelia shook her head. Not really. He just said that we needed to lay low and stay out of sight for a while. Michael stood up and began pacing the room. Cordelia, this is bigger than just Bryce disappearing. If he was involved with dangerous people, they might come after you too. We need to go to the police and tell them everything you know. Cordelia's eyes widened in fear. No, we can't do that, Dad. Bryce said they would kill us if we talked to anyone. Michael stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening. He knelt in front of his daughter, gripping her shoulders gently. Listen to me, Cordelia. Keeping quiet isn't going to protect you. If these people are as dangerous as Bryce thought, they won't stop just because you stay silent. We need help. Cordelia hesitated, tears streaming down her face. I'm scared, Dad. I don't know what to do. Michael pulled her into a tight embrace. We'll figure this out together. But I need you to trust me, okay? We'll find a way to keep you safe. As he held his daughter, Michael resolved to get to the bottom of the mystery, no matter the cost. Bryce's disappearance was just the beginning. Whatever secrets had been buried during their travels, Michael was determined to uncover them before it was too late. The tension was palpable as the investigation progressed. Michael, though cooperative, found himself increasingly under scrutiny. Investigators began to notice inconsistencies in his timeline, which only added to the air of suspicion surrounding the case. Cordelia, for her part, seemed trapped in a web of fear and loyalty. She admitted to the controlling nature of her relationship with Bryce, but still appeared reluctant to speak ill of him outright. Her hesitance frustrated both her father and the authorities. I don't understand, Michael confided to the lead detective one evening. I just want to help my daughter, but she's hiding something. Bryce's disappearance feels like a piece of a much larger puzzle. The detective nodded. That's what we're trying to figure out, Mr. Howard. But we need complete transparency from everyone involved. A new development. Just when it seemed the case had stalled, the police received a tip from a motel owner in Flagstaff, Arizona. The owner recognized Bryce and Cordelia from a photo circulated by investigators. He claimed they had stayed there for 3 nights about 2 weeks prior to Bryce's disappearance. The motel records confirmed that they had checked in under fake names and paid in cash. Surveillance footage showed Bryce frequently leaving their room late at night, sometimes returning with small packages. When confronted with this information, Cordelia broke down. Bryce was in trouble, she admitted tearfully. He owed money to people. Dangerous people. That's why we were in Arizona. He said he needed to settle a debt. Debt? For what? Michael asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know exactly," Cordelia replied. "But he was desperate. He said if he didn't pay, they'd come after us." The revelation sent chills through Michael. It confirmed his worst fears that Bryce's disappearance was tied to something criminal. The missing phones. Investigators focused on tracking down Bryce's and Cordelia's phones, hoping they held vital information. After days of searching, they located one of Bryce's smartphones at a pawn shop in Flagstaff. The device had been wiped clean, but forensic experts managed to recover fragments of data. Among the recovered messages was an exchange with a contact saved as J. The messages were cryptic, but hinted at a deal gone wrong. Phrases like "running out of time" and "they want more than we agreed" painted a grim picture. The storage unit. Attention shifted back to the storage unit where Bryce was last seen. A thorough search revealed a hidden compartment in one of the walls. Inside, police found a burner phone and a small stash of cash. The burner phone contained a single unsent message. "I'm out. Can't do this anymore. If you come near her, I'll make sure everyone knows." The message was timestamped just hours before Bryce's disappearance. The unraveling. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, a troubling narrative emerged. Bryce appeared to be entangled in a smuggling operation, likely involving drugs or illegal goods. His sudden disappearance suggested he had either tried to back out of the arrangement or had been silenced. Cordelia, despite her loyalty to Bryce, seemed to be an unwitting accomplice. Her fear and evasiveness made sense in light of the danger they were in. Michael, meanwhile, remained determined to protect his daughter. But as he reflected on the events leading up to Bryce's disappearance, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still missing from the story. The deeper the investigation went, the more it revealed the tangled history between the Ilix family and the tragic events surrounding Bryce and Cordelia. As authorities unraveled more details, it became clear that the relationship between father and daughter had a significant impact on the unfolding situation. Family dynamics and tensions. Michael's tight control over Cordelia's life was a growing point of concern. His mistrust of her choices, and especially his dislike for Bryce, painted a clearer picture of why Cordelia had been so eager to escape on her cross-country trip. While it had initially seemed like an innocent adventure, it was clear that the road trip served as an escape from the mounting pressures and tension at home. Cordelia's family dynamics were complex. Her mother's battle with Huntington's disease, combined with the challenges faced by her younger sibling, had created an already volatile household. But Michael's behavior, specifically his relentless pressure on Cordelia, had pushed her further away. Hiring a private investigator to follow her ex-boyfriend was just one example of the lengths Michael went to, showing how deep his mistrust ran. Investigators began to suspect that Michael's influence over his daughter had more to do with the conflict than Cordelia was willing to admit. She had wanted to break free, but in doing so, she had connected herself to Bryce, whose own life was full of uncertainties and struggles. Michael's admission. It wasn't until investigators confronted Michael about Bryce's phone that the truth started to come out. Initially, Michael denied any involvement with the phone, claiming he had never handled it. But after further questioning, he admitted that he had taken the phone from the car and disposed of it in a gas station trash bin in Brainerd the same evening Bryce disappeared. His reasoning was that he wanted to protect Cordelia from being tracked by whoever was behind Bryce's disappearance. The admission was a significant moment in the investigation. Michael had gone to great lengths to shield his daughter from what he believed was an even darker situation. But the authorities now wondered, was he protecting her, or was he concealing something more troubling? Bryce the dreamer with a hidden life. Bryce Broal's background also added more layers to the investigation. Born in Brainerd in 1999, Bryce had always been a dreamer. At 23, he had aspirations of building a homestead in Alaska, hoping to live off the land and create a self-sufficient life. His relationship with Cordelia had started in February 2022, and the two had bonded over their shared love for adventure and the outdoors. Their trip across the country had been meant to give them the freedom they longed for, but as the investigation revealed, their relationship wasn't as idyllic as it seemed. While Bryce had envisioned a simple life, free of the constraints of society, he was also entangled in a world of danger and secrecy. His ties to people who could be dangerous were becoming clearer, and it appeared that his disappearance wasn't an accident, it was part of a larger, more sinister story. The search for truth. As Michael's actions and the details of Cordelia's life began to surface, it became evident that there were more questions than answers. Was Michael's overbearing control over his daughter a catalyst for her getting involved with Bryce? Or had something darker been happening between them during their travels? Was Bryce's disappearance truly the result of a criminal operation, or was it an elaborate ruse to disappear under the radar? As Cordelia clung to Bryce despite everything, the true nature of their relationship and the secrets they had been hiding began to emerge. And with each new piece of information, the authorities were no closer to understanding whether Bryce had been taken, or whether he had simply vanished on his own accord. As investigators dug deeper into Michael's past, his history with the law became an unsettling part of the investigation. His previous legal issues raised questions about his behavior and mindset. The revelation that Michael had been convicted of a crime involving a mentally incapacitated adult in 2018 raised doubts about his motivations and his sense of control in sensitive situations. This new information painted a complicated picture of Michael as a man with a troubled past and a tendency to act out of fear or anger. Despite Michael's attempts to explain his actions, his conflicting statements and inconsistencies had investigators questioning whether his motives were purely protective, or whether there was more to his involvement in Bryce's disappearance than he was letting on. Michael's anguish and helplessness were real, but his desire to protect his daughter might have clouded his judgment, leading him to make decisions that only complicated the investigation further. The strained relationship between Cordelia and Bryce was also critical in understanding what had happened. Michael's suspicions about Bryce's controlling behavior were not unfounded. He had witnessed firsthand how Bryce seemed to dominate every aspect of Cordelia's life, from monitoring her phone activity to manipulating her emotions. Michael had seen his daughter become increasingly withdrawn and submissive, which triggered his desire to intervene. However, his intervention, at least as far as investigators were concerned, seemed to have crossed a line between protection and control. As investigators continued to piece together the story, they found themselves questioning not only the events surrounding Bryce's disappearance, but also Michael's role in the family's turmoil. His background, his strained relationship with his daughter, and his increasingly erratic actions were beginning to paint a picture of a man who might have had more to do with the situation than he was willing to admit. Cordelia, for her part, remained conflicted and torn. On one hand, she loved Bryce and seemed to feel deeply connected to him, but on the other, she had witnessed the destructive dynamics of their relationship and felt trapped between the man she loved and her protective father. She found herself caught in a web of guilt, fear, and confusion, unsure of who to trust or what actions to take. But the more he spoke, the more his words seemed to raise doubts about his true role in the events surrounding Bryce's disappearance. Michael's repeated insistence on protecting his family and his strong emotions about Bryce's behavior added layers to the investigation. Despite passing the polygraph tests, investigators remained skeptical, knowing that polygraphs were not definitive proof of innocence. Michael's credibility was now under scrutiny, not just because of his personal history, but also because of his contradictory statements and behavior. The tense atmosphere during the interrogations was palpable. Michael's frustration grew as the investigators pressed him for answers, but he held his ground. He argued that while he had been angry with Bryce, his actions had never been meant to harm him. However, his words were sometimes at odds with the actions he had taken. Throwing away Bryce's phone and expressing a desire to scare him off were not the actions of a passive bystander. These inconsistencies painted a picture of someone who might have been acting out of fear, but also out of a desire to control the situation. The fact that Michael had confronted Bryce multiple times about the bruises on Cordelia's face added to the complexity. He claimed that he had warned Bryce that any further harm to his daughter would result in consequences. But was this really an act of protection, or was it driven by something deeper, like a need for control over Cordelia's choices? Investigators were not convinced by Michael's explanations, especially since he kept referring to Bryce in the past tense, as if he had already accepted Bryce's disappearance as a fait accompli. His continued focus on his daughter's relationship with Bryce was not lost on the investigators, who now had to consider whether Michael was involved in a more direct way than he had let on. Michael Ilix's controlling relationship with his daughter Cordelia and his growing mistrust of her boyfriend, Bryce Broal, set the stage for a tragic and violent crime. Concerned for Cordelia's well-being and fueled by suspicions of abuse, Michael's protective instincts transformed into frustration and anger. This led him to confront Bryce at his storage unit, where an argument turned fatal. Michael shot Bryce in the back of the head, claiming it was an impulsive act to protect his daughter. However, the evidence painted a darker picture. Investigators uncovered forensic evidence and testimony revealing a premeditated plan. Michael had previously threatened Bryce and told others he intended to kill him. A bleach bottle found in the storage unit contained both Bryce's and Michael's DNA, while a sled used to move Bryce's body was discovered with traces of blood. Phone records showed Michael's movements from the storage unit to a remote area near Edward Lake, where Bryce's body was eventually found buried. Despite Michael's claims of acting out of fear for Cordelia's safety, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. Testimonies revealed Michael's long-standing animosity toward Bryce and his belief that killing him was the only way to protect Cordelia, even though she denied any abuse. In April 2024, Michael was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The case highlights the destructive power of fear, mistrust, and unresolved conflict, which led to the loss of a young man's life and the irreversible fracture of a family. It serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of addressing concerns through understanding and open communication, rather than resorting to violence.